Nigeria has already been struggling to keep up its crude oil output. Africa's oil giant lost the #1 slot to its rival Angola last month. Nigeria is dealing with a new militant group that goes under the name Delta Avengers. They came with a big bang in February, blowing up strategic pipelines in the region and threatening more attacks. Their activities have since forced production levels down to 1.69 million per day, not far from the 1.68 fall in 2007. Niger Delta has been prone to militant attacks. The last militant group there was known as MEND, Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta. The group disbanded after negotiating an amnesty deal with the government, but they continue to claim an unpaid resettlement package. Now, security expert Vince Onyekwelu thinks MEND could be reinventing itself.
The bottom line here is MEND could be on their way back. Also, fraternal groups, people move on. Splinter groups are formed from the actual initiators of those kind of fraternal groups. Just like in Boko Haram, it's obvious that they've split into different gangs with different names, with different agenda based on who is their commander.
The group had earlier released a list of demands, a sign that they're open to negotiations. They want 60% of indigenous people to own and control oil blocks, among other things. Vincent Onyekwelu believes the government may be dealing with a more sophisticated group this time.
If you see the way they wrote that particular letter, that means if it came from them, actually, but it shows they are very articulate. It shows they've got probably some new PR experts, because those litany of requests they made, they touch very salient issues that many Nigerians are interested in.
The government's been talking tough against militants in the oil-rich Delta region. President Buhari said he would treat pipeline vandals like terrorists. But observers here think this is more of a scramble for a share of oil resources, and the government can negotiate its way out. Oil is Nigeria's biggest earner. Crude oil accounts for nearly 90% of its revenue and 70% of its exports. But falling global prices has wiped out more than half of that already. It means government will struggle to fix damaged oil installations with limited funds and find a lasting solution to this newborn crisis on the other hand. Kelechi Emekalam, CCTV Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's now go to Deji Badmas for more on this story. He joins us live from Lagos. Deji, President Muhammadu Buhari issued a directive to security agents to crush this militant group, the Delta Avengers. Has there been any visible signs of that directive being enforced?
Absolutely, Penina. We've seen a deployment of military personnel to the creeks of the Niger Delta. As a matter of fact, just yesterday or the day before yesterday, there was a massive military presence at the hometown of one of the ex-militants that who has been declared wanted now by the government, for failing to appear in court. So we've seen, a massive deployment of the military through the creeks of the Niger Delta. And the military has also issued a statement, just this evening now, issued a statement asking, basically warning the militants to behave, and that it was ready to use force to end the waves of attacks we've had. So you're quite right. We've seen the government now moving to enforce, the military, I should say, moving now to enforce the order given by the president.
But Deji, are there any policy change proposals to ensure that communities around oil producing areas reap from the benefits they are currently being denied?
Well, the fact is that it depends on who you would be talking to. Fact is, the communities are benefiting, sort of, in a way. There's this policy called the derivation. It's a fund now. It's called the derivation fund. Now, that derivation funds, gives 13% of government revenue now to communities where oil or basically minerals are produced. So before now, oil producing communities are still, they're enjoying that 13%. Of course, there are talks in government now that that might be increased maybe to something around 15 to 20%, but there's just no agreement on it. So as we speak today, oil producing communities are getting 13%. Now, whether that will go up, we just have to wait and see. But fact is that it's not as if these communities are neglected. They are getting 13%. Communities that are not oil producing are not getting this money. Penina?
Yeah, Niger Delta, Deji, has been a hotbed of militancy, understandably, because oil is Nigeria's biggest earner. How much of these activities affected production so far?
Well, it's really affected production. For instance, because of the recent attacks by the militants, we've seen production. We've seen oil companies now shut down production, and we've seen Nigeria's production reduce. Just as Kelechi mentioned in her report, Nigeria has lost that #1 status in Africa to Angola. The budget benchmark for this year in terms of oil production is around 2.22 million barrels per day, but what we're seeing now is something far less. We're seeing something in the region of 1.6. Now, that could take a toll on the budget, because if we're not able to produce enough, it definitely means we'll not be able to meet our budget targets, especially now that the price of oil is not picking up as fast as you would expect. Before now, people, some analysts had said, look, if the price of oil could rise to maybe above $45, even if we were not able to meet the oil production benchmark now of the budget, you could use a surplus in the sales of oil now to augment that shortfall. But what we're seeing now is that prices are coming down, and then Nigeria may just not be able to meet its oil benchmark production. Now, that could affect the budget. It could affect the revenue now that comes to government, and we could come to a situation where the government would find it difficult to implement the budget, or the government might just be forced to borrow more, and that, of course, as you know, would increase the size of the budget deficit. Penina?
It's quite a tough nut there, Deji. Thanks very much for those insights. Deji Badmas live in Lagos. Well,